Welcome back, everyone. Emotional testimony and policy debate filled a San Diego Commission meeting Saturday as community members weighed in on police pretext stops. The discussion could lead to changes in how some traffic stops are handled by SDPD. News 8's Alec Lai breaks down the recommendation and what happens next and joins us here after the story.
The Commission on Police Practices, or CPP, presented their recommendations on SDPD pretext stops, citing data that shows racial disparities.
I wish I would have known that his life was on the line.
The police reason getting pulled over is because you're
3 years ago, Christopher DeArmond was pulled over by SDPD for a broken taillight. The stop escalated when officers tried to search his car for drugs. Police say DeArmond led them on a chase and fired at officers.
Show me your hands!
SDPD returned fire, killing him. His family attended today's meeting, calling for changes to the pretext stop policy.
My brother didn't deserve what happened to him that night. The only thing he deserved was his ticket, and that's the only thing he wanted.
A pretext stop happens when an officer pulls over a driver for a minor traffic violation to investigate an unrelated, more serious suspicion.
So if you're going to stop somebody for window tint, but then you express no interest in the course of the stop in the window tint, but you want to see if possibly there's some drugs or weapons in the car.
The CPP presented San Diego data from 2024 showing Black individuals were stopped 3 times more often than expected and were 4 times more likely to be frisked than people perceived to be white.
So this review is...
The commission is recommending SDPD limit traffic stops for low-level violations that don't pose an immediate safety threat, including expired registration under 1 year, a missing front license plate, or window tint violations.
Mind you, they don't have the tool to measure window tint when they're pulling people over in San Diego.
They also want officers to clearly communicate the reason for a stop, justify any expansion of the investigation, and better track searches and other enforcement actions.
I want them to say their name and their badge number, answer any questions that the person being stopped has.
Following public comment, the policy committee will revise the recommendations before sending them back to the CPP for a final vote. If approved, a letter will be sent to SDPD.
So they never have to accept a single recommendation that we make. But we want to put them in a situation where if they reject it, they're going to need to express some good reasons for that. And those reasons will also be part of the public conversation going forward.
SDPD will then have 60 days to respond. Alex Lai, News 8.
Okay, now joining us here in studio is our Alex Lai. So, Alex, obviously Saturday, not normally when you see, a commission meeting, but the CPP obviously operating here. And we still saw people come out to something, even when it's on the weekend. So tell me, there was a bit of emotion behind this as well, too, behind what some people were calling for, right?
There was, and I will say the crowd looked a little bit smaller. Sorry, I'm messing with my headphones here.
Good.
The crowd looked a little bit smaller, but there were like 20 or so people also tuning in virtually, and so a lot of them had public comment as well, and or were just chiming in. So like you said, a kind of emotional testimony. They did allow public comment, so people to go up and share their experiences or how they feel, things that have happened to their family members, to their friends, and what have you. But just for a little bit of background, a pretext stop is when you're pulled over for some sort of low-level traffic violation, a broken tail light, a window tint. Someone said that they got pulled over repeatedly for an air freshener blocking their view because, that is something you can get pulled over for.
Right.
But the pretext stop happens when you're pulled over for one of these low-level violations and the officer begins investigating something unrelated to that violation. So you're pulled over for the air freshener. They don't mention the air freshener once. It's, hey, we're worried there's a firearm in the car and we need you to get out of your vehicle and we need to search your car. And it's like, okay, well, you can't pull me over for, well, you can because it's legal, but you can, but what do you,
their argument, yeah.
Exactly. What do you mean you're pulling me over for this air freshener? You're not mentioning the air freshener at all. You're using this as a reason to pull me over and search my vehicle. So they presented a lot of data, and this is from several reports. A lot of the data from this year and then a lot of it from 2024 as well, showing how many citations there are and then kind of also breaking it down by demographics. So it showed a lot of racial disparities. A lot of people they compared specifically Black people being pulled over a lot more. They compared that to people who are perceived to be white. A lot of the other demographics kind of fell a little bit more in between, but it was specifically individuals who were perceived to be Black they were pulled over for these pretext stops, like, and other data too. They were like detained more, they were frisked more, they were, had more searches. They had a lot more of it's called like consent to search, where you're kind of like, okay, you have to give me consent to search your vehicle, but the commission's arguing like this is not clear enough. Like people are just giving up their consent immediately. A lot of these little issues tied into this.
So the commission is going to recommend these changes, but they don't necessarily have to be instituted. You touched on the process. What would be the process for instituting some of these changes to try to combat some of what the data shows might be some racial disparity?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to include that last soundbite from the executive director, Roger Smith, because it kind of said, when we're saying we're going to make these recommendations, what does that mean exactly? Like, it's a recommendation. It doesn't mean like we need you to do this, but this is an oversight committee of the San Diego Police Department. Their purpose is to make sure that the community has a voice in SDPD practices, and they just are trying to make the policing fair. Not saying that SDPD isn't, but just that is the goal of this organization. So it's a city organization. The city of San Diego, put together this organization, but it doesn't have to directly impact SDPD. So SDPD is getting these recommendations. They don't have to follow them. They're recommendations, but they are highly researched. They're from this committee that their sole purpose is to oversee the police department, and it has a significant amount of community feedback, as we saw. So these recommendations, are very thorough, and they're being sent to SDPD. And the executive director was saying, okay, SDPD can completely deny these. They cannot say anything. They can just reject them straight up. But they need to provide a reasoning. So when we hear that reasoning, that is something that will be shared with the community, that will be shared with the public, that will lead to a bigger conversation going forward, because this commission is still going to be in place, and they're still going to be investigating and researching this sort of information. So it will lead into a broader conversation regardless.
I know one of the proposals in particular, and I'm quoting directly from your script here, that says one of the recommendations is limiting traffic stops for low-level violations that don't pose an immediate safety threat. A couple of the examples you mentioned here: expired registration under 1 year, a missing front license plate, or window tint violations. Is there a conversation that's being had about enforcement on those? Is it something to where you run the license plate and you send the ticket via mail versus just a stop? Are those some of the conversations that are taking place there?
Yeah, I had that exact question actually, because if you have a registration under 1 year, and it's just like it's illegal.
And you see it when you're driving around.
Yeah, and it's like what are you supposed
it's
to
color
do?
coordinated.
So. Exactly, and that is something that people frequently will get pulled over for. So they listed some recommendations of enforcement, mail notices, like portal situations, I guess. Different,
but a variety. There's options, is what you're saying.
The only one I can remember off the top of my head was the mail-in notices, because I guess that is kind of the one that makes the most sense if you can't pull someone over. But there was this suggestion of trying to prevent low-level traffic stops like that, like, hey, if your registration's almost, I guess they can't pull you over for that, but like your window tint, and they also said that SDPD doesn't have the tool to be able to measure window tint, so even if you pull someone over for that, like, you can't technically measure it and like prove that. So there are these kind of certain circumstances where they're saying if your air freshener is blocking your back window and it's not posing an immediate public safety threat, maybe we try sending you this mail letter notice, maybe we try doing XYZ. There was also another conversation, again, these are just like ideas that are up in the draft. So another recommendation was just kind of eliminating these pretext stops where you can still pull someone over for the window tint, but if you are talking only about the window tint, if you are saying your window tint looks too dark, we can't measure it, what is your window tint at, like, tell us and we'll give you this fix-it ticket or what have you. So that was kind of one of the other pieces, was like, hey, these low-level traffic violations, as long as you're only talking about these, that is kind of like one of the recommendations that we're going for.
Okay. Well, definitely something to keep an eye on here as we move forward. Alex, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Obviously, again, even though it's the weekend, news still happening, especially on a Saturday.